You feel it before you see it. That subtle shift in atmospheric pressure when someone decides to test your boundaries. Perhaps it arrives disguised as humor, a cutting remark wrapped in laughter. Or it manifests as dismissal, your words suddenly invisible, your presence reduced to furniture. Most observe these moments and let them pass, convincing themselves that reaction would be weakness. They are already dead. The game of power begins not with action but with recognition. When another human being probes your defenses, they are not attacking you. They are measuring you, testing the walls of your fortress, checking if the gates are guarded or if they've been left open by neglect. This is not personal. This is reconnaissance. And your response in those first 3 seconds determines whether you remain sovereign or become colonized territory. You must understand what the ancient strategists knew. Respect is not earned through virtue. It is enforced through consequence. The moment someone violates your boundaries without cost, you have taught the entire room a lesson that you are territory to be claimed, not power to be reckoned with. When the violation occurs, your first instinct screams for reaction, to defend, to counter-strike, to explain. These are the responses of prey, not predator. The wolf does not bark when challenged. It goes still, absolutely still. And in that stillness lives something more terrifying than rage, calculation. Your silence becomes a weapon, but not the silence of submission. This is the silence of assessment. You withdraw your energy like oxygen from a flame. The conversation they expected to control suddenly loses its fuel. Where they anticipated resistance, they find vacuum. Where they sought reaction, they discover void. Watch their face change. The smirk falters. The confidence wavers, because humans are wired to fear the unknown more than the known. Your emotional explosion would have been predictable, manageable, forgettable. But your stillness, your absolute refusal to play the role they've written for you, that creates something they cannot control, uncertainty. Now you move with precision, not aggression, precision. You hold their gaze longer than comfort allows. You let the silence stretch until it becomes a living thing in the room. Then, with the calm of someone discussing whether, you pose a simple question: would you like to reconsider that statement? Not a threat, an opportunity. You're offering them a door, but it's a door that leads to their own exposure. Most will not walk through it. They'll stumble, they'll qualify, they'll suddenly remember somewhere else they need to be, because opportunists are cowards dressed in temporary confidence. But this is only the opening movement. The real game begins in what follows. You see, most people can manage one confrontation. They can summon courage for a single moment of resistance. What they cannot sustain is the architecture of consequence. This is where you separate yourself from the masses who demand respect but never command it. You don't return to baseline. There is no normal to resume. The person who violated your boundaries has revealed themselves, and revelation demands response, not emotional response, but structural response. You reconfigure the entire dynamic. Your warmth, once freely given, becomes a scarce resource. Your attention, once guaranteed, becomes conditional. Your presence, once predictable, becomes selective. You don't announce these changes. Announcement is weakness. You simply implement them with the quiet efficiency of winter arriving. They will feel it before they understand it. The temperature drops when you enter their space. Conversations that once flowed now stutter and stall. The easy rapport has been replaced by something formal, distant, professional. You haven't punished them. You've simply withdrawn your investment. And withdrawal, when executed with precision, is more devastating than any attack. This is the principle the old masters understood. Punishment that equals the offense teaches nothing, but consequence that exceeds expectation rewrites the entire power structure. You're not seeking justice. Justice is a consolation prize for those without power. You're establishing precedent. When they test again, and they always test again, your response escalates not in volume but in consequence. They make a joke. You address the room as if they've ceased to exist. They seek your input. You provide monosyllables. They attempt reconciliation. You offer them the social equivalent of winter, present but unreachable. The room watches. The room always watches. And what they observe becomes your mythology, not the story you tell about yourself, but the story they tell each other about you. This is where true power crystallizes, not in your actions, but in their interpretation of your patterns. People begin to speak differently around you, not from fear but from recognition. They've witnessed what happens when boundaries are crossed. They've seen how you don't explode, you simply remove. You don't fight, you withdraw access. You don't demand, you demonstrate through absence what presence was worth. Your name begins to carry weight it didn't before. Introductions include warnings. Choose your words carefully with that one. They don't suffer fools. Cross them once, and you won't get the chance twice. This is reputation as armor, built not through intimidation, but through disciplined consequence. But there exists a breed of challenger who won't be deterred by your withdrawal. They feed on reaction, any reaction. Your silence only amplifies their aggression. These are the parasites of power, and they require different treatment. For these, you employ exposure rather than engagement. When they strike, you don't strike back. You illuminate. You turn their aggression into performance, their attack into exhibition. A simple phrase, delivered with surgical calm. Interesting that you chose to say that here, in front of everyone. Or, I'm curious what you're hoping to accomplish with that approach. You're not defending, you're directing attention, making them the center of scrutiny they didn't request, forcing them to own their aggression publicly without the cover of your emotional response to hide behind. This is the difference between reaction and strategy. Reaction validates their power. Strategy reveals their weakness. The room becomes your ally without recruiting them. They see the aggressor exposed, desperate, grasping for the reaction that never comes. They witness you maintaining perfect composure while your challenger scrambles for footing. The power dynamic shifts, not because you won, but because they lost themselves in the attempt to destabilize you. This is mastery, when your presence alone becomes a form of governance, when people self-regulate around you not from explicit threat, but from implicit understanding. You've transcended the need to demand respect because you've made disrespect too expensive, not in conflict, but in consequence. The transformation goes deeper still. You begin to perceive disrespect not as wound, but as intelligence. Every violation becomes data. Every boundary tested reveals the tester's weakness, insecurity, desperation. You stop taking it personally because you recognize it was never about you. It was always about them, their need to elevate themselves by diminishing others, their hunger for reaction to feed their significance. This shift in perception changes everything. You become unshakable not through strength, but through understanding. When someone disrespects you now, you don't feel attacked. You feel informed. You've learned something valuable about their character, their limits, their fears. And information, in the game of power, is currency. You catalog these moments, not for revenge. Revenge is emotional. You catalog them for strategy. Who has revealed themselves as unreliable, who has shown they cannot be trusted with proximity, who needs to be removed from your sphere not as punishment, but as hygiene. Your world reorganizes around these calculations. Some people lose access entirely. Others find themselves downgraded from intimate to acquaintance. Still others become examples. Their failed attempts to disrespect you become teaching moments for those watching. But the most profound shift happens in your relationship with approval. You stop needing it, not in the rebellious way of those who claim not to care while desperately caring, but in the genuine detachment of someone who has discovered something more valuable than being liked, being untouchable. Your warmth becomes a gift, not an obligation. Your presence becomes a privilege, not a given. Your attention becomes currency, spent only where it generates return. This isn't coldness. This is economics. The economics of energy, where you've stopped subsidizing those who would bankrupt you. The paradox emerges. The less available you become, the more valuable your availability becomes. The less you speak, the more weight your words carry. The less you react, the more your stillness commands attention. You've discovered the multiplication effect of scarcity. People begin approaching you differently, with consideration, with preparation, with respect not demanded but assumed. They think before they speak. They measure their words. They consider consequences, not because you've threatened them, but because you've trained them through consistency of consequence. This is the architecture of untouchability, built not on aggression, but on absence, not on dominance, but on discrimination. You've become someone whose boundaries are not just respected, but anticipated. People protect your boundaries for you, warning others, establishing buffer zones, managing approach. There comes a moment when someone who has disrespected you realizes their error. They return, perhaps with apology, perhaps with nervous laughter, perhaps with overcompensation. This is your moment of ultimate power, not in how you punish, but in how you don't. You remain unchanged. No bitterness pollutes your composure, no resentment corrupts your calm, but also no warmth returns, no bridge rebuilds. You've moved forward, and they remain where they placed themselves, outside the walls they chose to assault. This isn't cruelty, this is consequence crystallized. They learn that some things once broken don't repair, some access once revoked doesn't restore, some people once crossed don't return, not in anger but in simple, irrevocable distance. The message spreads without your speaking it. You get one chance, not from threat but from observation. Those who witness these dynamics understand intuitively that you are not someone to test casually, that your boundaries are not suggestions but laws, that violation carries a price that compounds over time. Your reputation solidifies not as someone difficult or demanding, but as someone definite, clear, consistent, absolutely reliable in your response to disrespect. This predictability in consequence creates unpredictability in approach. People don't know exactly what you'll do, but they know it will be decisive, calculated, and permanent. The room reorganizes around this understanding. Conversations shift when you enter. Energy recalibrates, not from fear, but from recognition of someone who has transcended the usual social contracts. You don't play by their rules because you've written your own, and your rules are simpler, cleaner, absolute. You notice how former challengers now give you wide berth, how those who once tested now defer, how the same people who attempted to diminish you now speak your name with careful consideration. Not because you fought them, but because you didn't need to. Your withdrawal was more devastating than any confrontation could have been. This is the final evolution. You stop seeing disrespect as something to combat and start seeing it as natural selection. Those who disrespect you select themselves out of your world. They remove themselves from access to your energy, your network, your consideration. They solve your problem for you by revealing who should never have been close in the first place. Your circles become smaller but stronger. The people who remain are those who understood from the beginning or learned through observation. They value what you offer because they've seen what happens when it's withdrawn. They protect their access because they know it's not guaranteed. Power consolidates around you not through accumulation, but through subtraction. Every person removed, every boundary enforced, every consequence delivered increases your density, your gravity. You become someone others orbit carefully, maintaining safe distance, approaching only with purpose and respect. The silence that once signaled your response now precedes you. It announces your arrival, accompanies your presence, follows your departure. Not empty silence, but full silence, weighted with potential, charged with possibility, dense with implication. You've achieved what the masses never understand. Respect is not something you pursue. It's something that pursues you when you stop being available for disrespect, when you make violation more expensive than compliance, when your absence carries more weight than most people's presence. This is mastery, not the mastery of others, but mastery of self. Complete sovereignty over your reactions, your energy, your access. You've become ungovernable not through rebellion, but through remove. Untouchable not through defense, but through distance. Unshakable not through strength, but through strategic silence. The game ends not with victory, but with transcendence. You're no longer playing. You've become the board itself, the space where others must navigate carefully, conscious of boundaries, aware of consequences. Respectful of the rules you've established through disciplined consistency. Let them wonder what you're thinking. Let them guess your next move. Let them calculate their approach. You've already won by making them consider it, by occupying space in their strategic thinking, by becoming someone they cannot dismiss, cannot diminish, cannot disrespect without accepting the permanence of consequence. This is your final position, not angry, not vindictive, not wounded, simply unavailable for anything less than what you've decided you deserve. And what you deserve is not negotiable, not flexible, not subject to their opinion or approval. You've become what power actually looks like, not loud but quiet, not aggressive but absolute, not demanding but undeniable. The person who cannot be disrespected, not because they fight every battle, but because they've made the battlefield irrelevant. They cannot reach what refuses to descend. They cannot shake what doesn't require their stability. They cannot disrespect what has already dismissed them as irrelevant to its existence. This is sovereignty, this is power. This is what it means to be untouchable, not through force, but through the simple, devastating reality that you no longer exist in the same space where disrespect lives. You've ascended beyond their reach, and from that height, their attempts look exactly like what they always were, the desperate grasping of those who mistake noise for power, aggression for strength, disrespect for dominance. But you know better, you've always known better, and now, through disciplined consequence and strategic withdrawal, you've made them know it too. The game is over, not because you won, but because you're no longer playing. You've become something more valuable than victorious. You've become unreachable. And in that distance lives a power they will never possess, the power of someone who doesn't need their respect, because you've transcended the entire economy where respect is traded. You exist now in a different realm, where boundaries are absolute, where consequence is certain, where your presence is gift and your absence is verdict. This is the throne you've built, not through conquest, but through conservation, not by taking, but by withholding, not by fighting, but by ascending beyond the reach of those who would test you. Silence is your final weapon. Distance is your ultimate victory. And they already know they only get one chance. After that, you're gone, not in rage, not in pain, but in the cold, calculated remove of someone who has more valuable territories to govern than the wasteland of their disrespect. Power doesn't forgive, it forgets, it moves forward, it leaves the unworthy behind in the silence they created when they thought your boundaries were suggestions rather than laws. Decide now, be untouchable or be available for violation. There is no middle ground. There never was.